A fainting fawn collapsed near a cliff. And what a mountain lion did next absolutely stunned the hikers who witnessed it. On a remote mountain trail, a group of ordinary people stumbled upon a moment so extraordinary that it would shatter everything they thought they knew about survival and instinct. In the span of just a few breathless minutes, nature revealed a secret so shocking that the hikers could barely process what their own eyes were seeing. It started like any other Saturday morning on the mountain trail. The kind of day where the world feels infinite, and the only sound is your own breathing mixing with the crunch of boots on gravel. Sarah, Marcus, and 2 other hikers had set out before dawn, chasing that golden hour light and the promise of solitude on one of the most remote peaks in the region. They'd hiked this trail a dozen times before. They knew every switchback, every vista point, every place where the trail narrowed dangerously close to the cliff edge. This was their sanctuary, the place where the noise of the world fell away and they could feel truly alive. But on this particular morning, something was different. As they rounded a bend about 2 miles up the trail, Marcus noticed it first. His pace slowed. His hand went up, signaling the others to stop. There, about 30 feet ahead on the narrow trail, lay something that shouldn't be there. At first, they couldn't quite make out what it was. The shape was too small to be a deer, too still to be anything moving naturally. Sarah squinted, her heart already beginning to race with an instinct she couldn't quite name. "Is that?" she whispered, not wanting to disturb whatever lay ahead. As they crept closer, the shape resolved into something heartbreaking. It was a fawn, a young mule deer no more than a few months old, judging by its size. But this wasn't just any fawn lying on the trail. This fawn was collapsed, its body completely motionless, its legs splayed out at odd angles as if it had simply crumpled mid-stride. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. The animal's eyes were open but glassy, unfocused, staring at nothing. Sarah's stomach twisted. She'd seen injured animals before, but something about this felt different. This fawn wasn't just hurt, it was dying. But that wasn't the worst part. The fawn was positioned less than 15 feet from where the trail dropped off into a sheer cliff face. The edge was invisible from where the fawn lay, hidden by a slight rise in the terrain, but Sarah could see it clearly from where she stood. One wrong step, one involuntary stumble in its weakened state, and the fawn would plunge hundreds of feet down into the ravine below. The animal was trapped in a nightmare it didn't even fully comprehend, dying on a mountain, inches away from an abyss. "Oh my God," whispered Jennifer, the youngest of the group. "What's wrong with it?" Marcus moved closer, his hands raised in a calming gesture despite knowing the fawn couldn't understand human reassurance. "Don't get too close, we don't want to spook it." He studied the animal carefully, his eyes scanning for signs of injury. No visible wounds, no blood, no obvious trauma. Just collapse. Complete, total collapse. "Could it be sick?" asked David, the 4th hiker, his voice tight with concern. Sarah knelt down slowly, keeping her distance, trying to read the signs written in the fawn's body language. The animal's breathing was wrong. Too shallow, too rapid. Its eyes had that distant, unfocused quality that suggested neurological distress. And then she noticed something else. The fawn's legs were trembling, almost imperceptibly, as if the animal was fighting to stay conscious against some overwhelming force. "I think it's having some kind of seizure," Sarah said quietly. "Or maybe it's been poisoned, or—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice the darkest possibility. Heat stroke, dehydration, starvation. Any number of things could cause an animal to collapse like this in the wilderness. What they didn't know, what none of them could possibly have known in that moment, was that this fawn's condition was far more serious than simple illness. This was a creature on the very edge of death, its body shutting down, its consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. And it was positioned in one of the most dangerous places it could possibly be. Marcus checked his phone. No signal. Of course there wasn't. They were too high, too remote. Any help would have to come from them, and they had no idea what they could actually do for a wild animal in this condition. Moving it could make things worse. Leaving it meant watching it die. And the clock was ticking. They could all feel it. "We need to do something," Jennifer said, her voice cracking slightly. "We can't just leave it here." But Sarah was staring at something else now. Her eyes had moved past the fawn, past the trail, to the landscape beyond. The way the trees were positioned, the way the rocks were scattered, the subtle signs that something large had passed through here recently. Broken branches at a height no deer could reach. Claw marks on the bark of a nearby pine tree, deep and deliberate, marking territory. Her blood went cold. "Everyone," she said slowly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We need to be very quiet right now, and we need to stay alert." "Why?" Marcus asked, though something in her tone had already triggered his own survival instincts. "What is it?" "We're not alone on this mountain," Sarah said. "And whatever else is here, it's been watching this fawn for a while." The other hikers exchanged glances. The morning suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. The air itself seemed to change, becoming heavier, charged with a presence they couldn't see but could somehow feel pressing in from all sides. But they had no idea, absolutely no idea, what was about to happen next. The silence that followed Sarah's words was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The four hikers stood frozen on the narrow trail, their earlier sense of adventure replaced by something primal. The ancient awareness that they were no longer the apex predators in this landscape. They were guests here, and they were beginning to understand that not all guests were welcome. Marcus moved first, his eyes scanning the tree line with new urgency. "Mountain lion?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer from Sarah's expression. Sarah nodded slowly. "The claw marks on that tree, the way the branches are broken, this territory is marked. Recently." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the dense forest that bordered both sides of the trail. "And if I'm right about what I'm seeing, the lion has been following this fawn, probably for a while." Jennifer's breathing became audible, quick, shallow gasps that threatened to spiral into panic. David reached over and squeezed her shoulder, a gesture meant to ground her, to remind her to stay calm. But his own jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles white. The fawn, oblivious to the conversation happening just feet away, continued its shallow, labored breathing. Its body trembled slightly, and for a moment, one of its back legs twitched involuntarily. The animal was slipping further into whatever state had brought it to this point on the trail. "We need to move," Marcus said. "Back down the trail, now." But Sarah held up her hand. "Wait. If the lion is close, moving suddenly could trigger a chase response. We need to think about this carefully." She kept her voice low, measured, despite the fear that was beginning to coil in her chest like a living thing. "How close do you think it is?" As if in answer to her question, a sound cut through the forest. Not loud, but unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time in the wilderness. It was the crack of a branch, the kind of sound a large animal makes when it's moving through dense undergrowth without bothering to hide its presence anymore. The sound came from somewhere up the trail, beyond a thick stand of pine trees that blocked their view. Then came another sound, and another, deliberate, unhurried, the footfalls of something heavy, something powerful, something that knew exactly where it was going. "Oh God," Jennifer whispered. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." "Listen to me," Sarah said, her voice dropping even lower. "Mountain lions don't typically attack humans. They're ambush predators. They avoid confrontation with anything that might fight back. We're too big, too unpredictable. But right now, we're between that lion and its prey. We're obstacles, and we need to move in a way that doesn't trigger its hunting instincts." "What do we do?" David asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We back up slowly," Sarah said. "We don't run. We don't scream. We keep our eyes on the forest, and we move backwards down the trail until we get some distance between us and—" She was interrupted by a sound that made every hair on their bodies stand on end. It was a low growl, distant but distinct, echoing through the trees from somewhere ahead on the trail. Not the growl of a small animal, not the growl of anything that weighed less than 100 pounds. This was the sound of an apex predator announcing its presence, asserting its dominance over the landscape and everything in it. The hikers didn't need to be told twice. They began backing away from the fawn, their eyes fixed on the tree line, their movements slow and deliberate. Every step felt like it took an eternity. Every shadow between the trees seemed to hide teeth and claws. The forest had transformed in the space of a few minutes from a place of beauty into a place of primal danger. But as they retreated, Sarah's mind was working, analyzing, trying to piece together what she was seeing. The fawn's condition, the claw marks, the deliberate way the lion was moving, the positioning of the animal on the trail so close to the cliff edge. And then it hit her. A terrible realization that made her blood run even colder than it already was. "The fawn didn't collapse from illness," she whispered to the others, keeping her voice barely audible. "Look at how it's positioned. Look at the way it's lying. The lion has been herding it, chasing it, driving it toward the cliff edge. The fawn collapsed because it's exhausted, terrified, pushed to the absolute limit of its physical endurance." "Why would it do that?" Jennifer asked, confusion mixing with her fear. "Why not just attack?" "Because," Sarah said, her eyes still fixed on the tree line, "the cliff is the perfect kill zone. The fawn can't escape, it can't run, it can't fight back. The lion is using the geography of the mountain itself as a weapon. It's not just hunting, it's orchestrating." Another branch cracked. Closer this time, much closer. The footfalls were becoming more distinct now. The heavy pad of paws on earth, the rustle of fur against vegetation. The lion was no longer bothering to hide. It knew where its prey was. It knew the hikers were there. And it was moving toward both with the inexorable certainty of something that had done this 1,000 times before. The hikers continued backing up, their pace quickening now, no longer able to maintain the slow, deliberate movement that Sarah had insisted on. The fear was becoming too much, the instinct to flee too overwhelming. They were maybe 50 feet from the fawn now, maybe 60. Still not far enough. Still too close to whatever was coming through those trees. And then, through the dense forest, they saw it. A flash of tawny fur. The glint of eyes in the dappled sunlight. The unmistakable shape of a mountain lion, massive, muscular, moving with the fluid grace of something perfectly designed for killing. It emerged from the tree line about 30 feet up the trail from where the fawn lay. And for a moment, It simply stopped. It sat back on its haunches, its tails swishing slowly back and forth, and it looked directly at the hikers. The world seemed to pause. In that moment, there was no sound, no movement, nothing but the weight of that predatory gaze and the terrible understanding that they were witnessing something they were never meant to see. The lion's ears twitched. Its nose worked, scenting the air. And then, with a movement so fluid and deliberate that it seemed almost gentle, it turned its attention away from the hikers and toward the fawn. The real hunt was about to begin. The mountain lion took a single step toward the fawn, and in that moment, everything the hikers thought they knew about nature seemed to crystallize into a single, terrible certainty. This was it. This was the moment they would witness a kill. This was nature in its rawest, most brutal form. Predator and prey, survival and death. The fundamental law that governed everything that lived and breathed in the wilderness. Sarah felt her hand instinctively reach for Jennifer's arm. Marcus had stopped backing away entirely, his body rigid with the kind of tension that comes from witnessing something you cannot change and cannot escape. David's breath came in short, sharp gasps. They were trapped between the lion and the cliff, witnesses to an execution they were powerless to prevent. The fawn's eyes flickered. Whether the animal sensed the lion's approach or was simply caught in the final moments of whatever was shutting down its body, they couldn't tell. But something changed in that small creature. Its body tensed. Its breathing, which had been shallow and labored, became almost frantic. The fawn's legs began to move, not in coordinated escape, but in the jerky, desperate movements of something fighting against its own paralysis. The lion lowered itself into a crouch, its muscles coiling like springs. This was the moment. This was the final approach before the explosive violence of the kill. The hikers braced themselves, knowing what was coming, unable to look away, unable to stop it. And then something extraordinary happened. The fawn, in its desperation, in its terror, in that final moment of pure survival instinct, managed to push itself up onto its front legs. It was a movement that should have been impossible given its condition just moments before. The animal's back legs were still useless, still locked in whatever paralysis had gripped them. But the front legs worked. And with a cry that was part bleat, part scream, the fawn lurched forward, directly toward the cliff edge. The lion's ears flattened against its head. Its body tensed even further, preparing for the final strike. But the fawn was moving faster than anyone expected, propelled by pure panic and the animal's instinctive knowledge that the only escape lay in a direction that meant certain death. 3 feet from the cliff edge, 2 feet, 1 foot. The fawn's front hooves reached the very precipice, and for a moment it teetered there, balanced on the knife's edge between July and November. Somewhere in that building, Dr. Patel called the police at 3:30 p.m. They arrived within an hour, took statements from all 3 patients, contacted Vanessa's family in Los Angeles, but no one could explain it. Greg and Rebecca had entered Bodie on November 19, 2024. Vanessa had entered July 18th. All 3 fell through the same floor in the same building and emerged on the same night, November 19th, at different times. Time doesn't work like that. But their injuries were real. The blood at Bodie was real. Vanessa's 4 months of missing time was documented. The police interviewed Greg and Rebecca separately. Neither remembered seeing anyone else in Bodie. Both described being alone, falling through a floor they couldn't see in darkness, spending hours in a basement trying to escape. When they finally climbed out, it was November 19th, and they walked until they reached Highway 395. Vanessa remembered July 18th, remembered her friends, Remembered exploring the Boone store in daylight. Remembered seeing a door that seemed interesting, opening it, falling. She remembered her friends calling her name, then waking up in darkness, alone, freezing, November. The police searched Bodie again, November 21st. Found Vanessa's phone in the Boone store basement. Battery dead. Last activity July 18th. No sign of Emma or Jason. They're still in there. Still in July. Still looking for Vanessa. 2 more patients arrived in our ER on November 23rd. Same injuries, same story, same building. One had entered Bodie in September, the other in August. Both fell through the same floor on November 23rd and walked out. Dr. Patel called the state park's director. They closed Bodie completely. No access, even for staff. Posted guards. But I know what's happening. That building is collecting people. They enter at different times, fall through the same floor, and exist in some pocket where time doesn't flow normally. Days, weeks, months pass outside while they're trapped in their moment of falling. Then, on specific nights, the building releases them, spits them out into winter, confused and freezing. I don't know why November 19th and 23rd. I don't know if there's a pattern to when it opens. But I know this. Vanessa's friends are still in that basement, along with whoever entered in August and September and didn't come out yet. Along with everyone who ever fell through that floor and hasn't emerged. Time layers on top of itself in that building. July, August, September, November, all happening simultaneously in the darkness below the floorboards. I don't work night shifts anymore. Requested transfer to days, they approved it. But every night at 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzes. Unknown number, no caller ID. When I answer, breathing, wind, the sound of old wood creaking. And once, 3 nights ago, a voice. Aaliyah, we're still in the basement. It's still July 18th. Please send help. The voice was mine. I haven't been to Bodie. Not yet. But somehow I happened. She raised the phone and took a picture. The sound of the camera shutter, barely audible, just a small mechanical click, seemed impossibly loud in the silence that had fallen over the mountain. The lion's eyes opened. It turned its head slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at the hikers. For a moment, Sarah was certain they were all about to die. She had violated some sacred boundary, some rule of the wilderness that she hadn't even known existed. She had witnessed something that was not meant to be witnessed, and now there would be a price. But the lion simply looked at them. Its gaze was intelligent, aware, almost understanding. And then it turned its attention back to the fawn, settling its great head down again, its massive body still curved protectively around the smaller animal. "What?" Jennifer began, but she couldn't finish the sentence. There were no words for what they were witnessing. "I don't know," Sarah whispered back. "I don't know what we're seeing." But she did know one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening on this mountain trail, whatever had just unfolded before their eyes, it was something that defied explanation. It was something that challenged every law of nature, every understanding of predator and prey, every assumption about the way the world worked. And it was far from over. Minutes passed. Sarah had no idea how many. 5, 10, maybe longer. Time had become elastic, unreliable, stretching and contracting in ways that didn't correspond to the normal passage of seconds and minutes. The hikers remained motionless, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before them, unable to fully comprehend what they were witnessing. The lion and the fawn lay together on the narrow mountain trail. The massive predator curled protectively around the small, trembling prey. But as Sarah watched, She began to notice details that made her understanding of the situation shift once again. The fawn's breathing was changing. It was becoming less frantic, less desperate. The animal's body, which had been rigid with terror just moments before, was beginning to relax. The tremors that had racked its small frame were subsiding, becoming less pronounced with each passing minute. And more remarkably, the fawn's back legs, the ones that had been completely paralyzed, completely unresponsive to any stimulus, were beginning to move. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, but moving nonetheless. A twitch here, a flex there, as if the animal's nervous system was gradually reawakening from whatever had shut it down. "Look," David whispered, pointing with a trembling hand. "The fawn. It's recovering." Sarah's mind raced, trying to process what this meant. The fawn had been dying. She was certain of that. The symptoms had all been there. The collapse, the labored breathing, the tremors, the glassy eyes that stared at nothing. All the signs of an animal in its final moments, slipping away into whatever lay beyond consciousness. But now, with the lion's body pressed against it, with the warmth of the great predator surrounding it like a living blanket, the fawn was visibly improving. "That's not possible," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was seeing the same thing they all were. The transformation was undeniable. The fawn's color was returning. Its breathing was becoming deeper, more rhythmic. Even from where they stood 30 feet away, they could see the subtle shift in the animal's condition. And then Sarah understood. Or at least, she began to form a theory that was so extraordinary, so improbable, that she almost didn't voice it. She let the silence stretch for a long moment, gathering her thoughts, trying to find the right words to express something that defied conventional understanding. "The fawn wasn't sick," she said slowly, her eyes never leaving the pair on the trail. "Or rather, it was sick, but not in the way we thought. Look at how thin it is. Look at the way its ribs are visible even from here, visible enough that we can count them from this distance. The fawn is starving. It's been separated from its mother probably for days, maybe longer. It's weak, dehydrated, on the verge of complete collapse from exhaustion and hunger. But there's something else." She paused, choosing her words carefully, aware that what she was about to suggest would sound absurd to anyone who hadn't witnessed what they had witnessed. "So the lion was hunting it," Jennifer said, her voice small and uncertain. "Just like we thought. Just like nature intended." "Yes," Sarah said. "But not to kill it. Not immediately. Not in the traditional sense. The lion was herding it, yes, but not toward the cliff to force it to jump. The lion was herding it toward itself, toward this exact location, this exact moment." The realization hung in the air between them, too strange, too impossible to fully accept. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the pine trees, carrying with it the scent of the forest, earth and needles and something else, something wild and indefinable. "You're saying the lion was trying to help it?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. The question itself seemed to violate some fundamental law of nature, some basic principle that had been drilled into them since childhood. Predators hunted, prey fled. That was the way of the world. There was no room for compassion, no space for mercy in the natural order of things. "I'm saying," Sarah replied carefully, "that the lion recognized that the fawn was in distress. And instead of taking advantage of that weakness, instead of delivering a quick kill and moving on to consume its meal, it did something else entirely. It brought the fawn to itself. It offered its own body warmth, its own presence, as a way to stabilize the animal, to heal it. As if to punctuate her words, the fawn shifted slightly, moving closer to the lion's body, pressing itself more firmly against the great predator's side. The animal's breathing had become steady now, almost peaceful. Its eyes were still open, but they were no longer glassy and distant. They were focused, aware, present. There was intelligence in those eyes now, recognition, understanding. The lion's eyes remained closed, but its body language had shifted subtly. The tension that had been coiled through its muscles like a coiled spring seemed to have released, dissipating like morning mist. The animal was no longer in hunting mode. It was no longer in the predatory state of heightened alertness and lethal potential. It was simply there, present, protective, almost maternal in its posture. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus said. But he was moving closer now, drawn by the same compulsion that had gripped the others. The rational part of his mind was struggling against what his eyes were telling him. But the evidence was undeniable. Mountain lions don't do this. They don't protect prey. They don't show compassion. They're predators. It's their nature. It's encoded in their DNA in millions of years of evolution. They kill or they don't. There's no middle ground. "Maybe," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder and uncertainty. "Or maybe we don't understand nature as well as we think we do. Maybe there's more to it than just the simple binary of predator and prey, killer and killed, survival and death. Maybe there are moments, rare moments, when something else emerges, something we don't have words for, something that transcends instinct and speaks to a deeper truth about consciousness, about empathy, about the fundamental connections that bind all living things together." As she spoke, the fawn made another movement. This time, it lifted its head slightly and turned it toward the lion's face. The small animal's nose, still slightly moist, still showing signs of life and vitality, touched the lion's cheek, a gesture that was almost tender, almost affectionate. And incredibly, impossibly, the lion opened its eyes and turned its great heads to meet the fawn's gaze. For a long moment, the two animals simply looked at each other. Predator and prey, killer and killed. But in that moment, those categories seemed meaningless, artificial, imposed by human understanding rather than reflecting any truth about the natural world. What Sarah saw in that exchange was something far more fundamental. A recognition between two creatures, a moment of connection that transcended the usual rules that governed their species. It was as if they were speaking to each other in a language that had no words, communicating on a level that went beyond sound or gesture or any conventional form of expression. Then the lion closed its eyes again, and the fawn settled back down against the great cat's body, tucking its small head beneath the lion's chin in a gesture of trust that should have been impossible. The fawn's ear flicked once, twice, then settled into stillness. The animal's breathing synchronized with the lion's breathing, the two creatures moving as one, their bodies rising and falling in perfect harmony. Jennifer was crying now, tears streaming down her face in silent rivers of emotion. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the wind and the distant call of a bird somewhere higher up the mountain. "In my entire life, nothing has ever moved me like this." But Sarah's mind was working on a different level. She was thinking about the photo she'd taken, about the impossibility of sharing this with anyone, about how no one would believe them. She was thinking about what this moment meant. about what it said about the nature of compassion, about whether instinct and learned behavior were as rigid and unchangeable as everyone assumed. She was thinking about how this single moment might reshape everything they understood about the relationship between predator and prey, about the hidden depths of animal consciousness. And she was thinking about something else too, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end and sent a chill running down her spine despite the relatively warm afternoon air. "The fawn," she said slowly, her voice taking on a new quality of urgency. It didn't just collapse from starvation and exhaustion. Look at its body more carefully. Look at the way it's moving now that it's recovering. Look at the pattern of its movements, the coordination, the fluidity. The others leaned in, their eyes narrowing as they tried to see what Sarah was seeing, to understand what had shifted in her perception. "What are you noticing?" David asked, his voice tight with anticipation and dread. "The fawn's movements," Sarah said. "They're coordinated, smooth, precise. But earlier, when it was in distress, when it was lying on the trail unable to move, they were jerky, uncontrolled, spasmodic, as if something was interfering with the normal functioning of its nervous system. As if..." She trailed off, not wanting to voice the thought that was forming in her mind, a thought so extraordinary that it seemed to border on the realm of science fiction rather than observable reality. "As if what?" Marcus pressed, moving even closer to Sarah, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage, preparing herself for the skepticism and disbelief that would surely follow. As if the fawn was being poisoned. As if something was affecting its nervous system, causing paralysis, causing the collapse. Something toxic, something that was slowly shutting down the animal's body systems. And the lion. She looked at the great predator, at the way it was lying so protectively around the fawn, at the careful positioning of its massive body. The lion knows what the fawn was poisoned with, and it knows how to treat it. "That's insane," Jennifer said. But her voice was uncertain, wavering. Because they had all seen things today that should have been impossible. Things that defied explanation. Things that challenged every law of nature, every understanding of animal behavior, every assumption about the way the world worked. That's completely and utterly insane. Lions don't have medical knowledge. They don't understand toxicology or pharmacology or any kind of science. They're animals. They operate on instinct. "Do they?" Sarah asked quietly, and there was something in her tone that silenced any further objections. "Or is it possible that instinct is far more sophisticated, far more intelligent, far more informed than we've ever given it credit for? Is it possible that there are forms of knowledge that exist outside of conscious thought, that are transmitted through generations, that inform behavior in ways we don't yet understand?" And as Sarah watched, she noticed something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat and her heart begin to race with a new kind of urgency. The lion's body was trembling slightly, almost imperceptibly, a tremor that ran through its muscles like an electric current. And there was something dark on its fur, something that looked like blood. "The lion is injured," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of deep concern. "Look at its side. There's blood. Fresh blood. The lion is wounded." As if in response to her observation, the lion's breathing became slightly more labored. The animal's body tensed, and for a moment, pain flickered across its face. A subtle tightening around the eyes, a slight curl to the upper lip that revealed a hint of fang. But it didn't move. It didn't try to shift away from the fawn. It didn't attempt to distance itself or seek relief. It simply lay there, bleeding, injured, protecting the small animal that had been its prey just minutes before. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed, his voice filled with a mixture of horror and awe. What happened to it? How did it get injured? Did it fight something? Did it get attacked? But Sarah thought she knew. She thought she understood the full story now. The complete picture of what had unfolded on this mountain trail over the course of what must have been hours, maybe even days. And it was a story far more complex, far more tragic, and far more beautiful than any of them could have imagined. She thought about the claw marks on the trees. She thought about the way the lion had herded the fawn. She thought about the positioning, the deliberate nature of every movement. And she thought about the blood on the lion's side, the wound that was clearly causing it pain, but which it was ignoring in favor of caring for the fawn. "The lion didn't get injured fighting," she said slowly, piecing together the narrative as she spoke. "The lion got injured protecting the fawn, from whatever poisoned it, from whoever or whatever was hunting it. The lion put itself between the fawn and danger, and in doing so, it took the injury that was meant for the fawn. The lion sacrificed itself." The weight of that realization settled over them like a heavy blanket. They were witnessing not just compassion, not just mercy, but actual sacrifice. One creature, a predator, a killer, putting its own life at risk to save another creature that should have been nothing more than prey. Jennifer sank down onto a nearby rock, her legs no longer able to support her. David sat down beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Marcus remained standing, but his body was shaking, his eyes fixed on the lion and the fawn with an expression of profound emotion. And Sarah continued to watch, continued to document everything with her eyes and her mind, knowing that she would never be able to fully convey what they were witnessing to anyone else. Some experiences, she realized, were too profound, too extraordinary, too far outside the realm of normal human experience to be adequately captured in words or photographs. But as the afternoon light began to shift, casting longer shadows across the mountain trail, she understood that this moment would change them all. It would reshape their understanding of nature, of compassion, of the hidden depths of consciousness that existed in creatures they had always thought of as simple, instinctual, incapable of the kind of moral complexity that humans prided themselves on possessing. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed almost unreal in their beauty. Sarah checked her watch. 4:47 p.m. They had been standing on this trail, witnessing this impossible scene, for nearly 2 hours. 2 hours that had felt like both an instant and an eternity. Time compressed and expanded simultaneously by the weight of what they were experiencing. The fawn had continued to improve. Its breathing was now deep and regular, its body no longer trembling with the violent shakes that had gripped it earlier. The animal's eyes had closed, and it appeared to be sleeping, nestled against the lion's warm body like a kitten against its mother. The paralysis that had gripped its back legs seemed to have completely resolved. When the fawn had shifted position 30 minutes ago, all 4 legs had moved in perfect coordination, the nervous system fully restored to normal function. But the lion was deteriorating. The bleeding from the wound on its side had continued, though not dramatically. It was more of a slow seep than a gush, but it was persistent, relentless. The fur around the injury was matted with blood, darkened to an almost black color. And the lion's breathing, once deep and steady, had become more shallow, more labored. The great cat's eyes remained closed, but occasionally they would flutter open for just a moment, as if the animal was checking on its charge, ensuring that the fawn was still there, still safe, still alive. Sarah moved slowly, carefully, closing the distance between herself and the pair on the trail. Her movements were deliberate and non-threatening, her body language open and submissive. She had no idea if the lion would perceive her as a threat now, wounded and weakened as it was. But she wasn't about to take any chances. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Marcus called out, his voice tight with alarm. "Get back here. That's still a mountain lion. Wounded animals are unpredictable." But Sarah continued forward, drawn by a compulsion she didn't fully understand. She needed to see the wound more clearly. She needed to understand the extent of the injury, the nature of it. She needed to know if there was anything they could do, any way they could help. She was now about 15 feet away from the lion and fawn. Close enough to see the details of the wound. Close enough to hear the lion's breathing, close enough to see the slight rise and fall of the great cat's chest. The wound itself was on the lion's left side, just behind the front leg. It was a deep laceration, roughly 3 inches long, with ragged edges that suggested it had been inflicted by something sharp, something powerful, something with teeth or claws. Sarah's mind immediately went to the most obvious explanation. Another lion. A territorial dispute, perhaps, or a fight over resources. But the wound didn't quite match the pattern she would have expected from a lion-on-lion encounter. The edges were too ragged, too torn. It looked more like a trap, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The lion was caught in a trap. "What?" David called from where he sat with Jennifer. "What did you say?" "A trap," Sarah repeated, louder this time. "Look at the wound. The way the flesh is torn, the way the bleeding is controlled but persistent. This isn't from a fight with another animal. This is from a snare or a steel trap, something man-made." The implications of that realization settled over the group like a heavy fog. Someone had set a trap on this mountain trail. Someone had been hunting. And the lion had walked into that trap, had been caught, had struggled against it, tearing its own flesh in the process. And instead of fleeing, instead of trying to escape and save itself, the lion had come here. To the fawn. To the animal that had been poisoned, that had been left to die, that had been abandoned by whatever human had set the trap and the poison. "Oh my God," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "Someone did this on purpose. Someone poisoned the fawn and set a trap for the lion. Someone is hunting them." Sarah's mind was racing, trying to piece together the full narrative. A poacher, most likely. Someone who had come to this mountain with the intention of killing wildlife, of taking trophies or selling body parts or simply enjoying the act of destruction for its own sake. The poacher had poisoned the fawn, probably hoping to use it as bait to draw in a larger predator. And when the lion had come to investigate, when it had found the dying fawn, it had walked directly into the trap. But instead of abandoning the fawn to its fate, instead of fleeing to save itself, the lion had freed itself from the trap, at the cost of a serious wound, and had come to care for the animal that should have been nothing more than prey. "We have to do something," Marcus said. And now he was moving forward too, his earlier caution overwhelmed by a sense of moral urgency. "We can't just stand here and watch it die. We have to help it." "How?" Sarah asked, though she was already thinking about possibilities. "We don't have medical supplies. We don't have antibiotics or pain medication or anything that would actually help a mountain lion. And even if we did, approaching an injured predator to render aid is, well, it's suicide." "So we do nothing?" Jennifer asked, her voice rising. "We just watch it bleed to death? After everything it's done, after everything we've witnessed, we just abandon it? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable and terrible. Because Jennifer was right. They couldn't just do nothing, but they also couldn't do anything that would actually help. They were caught in an impossible situation, trapped between the desire to act and the knowledge that any action they took would likely be futile or dangerous or both. David stood up, his jaw set with determination. "My backpack," he said. "I have a first aid kit. It's not much, but it's something. We could try to clean the wound, stop the bleeding." "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Marcus asked. "You're going to walk up to an injured mountain lion and ask it to hold still while you bandage its side. That lion could kill all 4 of us without breaking a sweat, even wounded." "Then what do you suggest?" David shot back. "That we turn around and walk away? That we pretend we didn't see this? That we go back to our normal lives and forget about this moment?" The argument might have continued, might have escalated, but Sarah held up her hand. "Wait," she said quietly. "Look at the lion." They all turned their attention back to the great cat, and what they saw made them all fall silent. The lion had opened its eyes. It was looking directly at them, its gaze moving from one hiker to the next, assessing, evaluating. There was intelligence in those eyes, a kind of understanding that went beyond simple animal awareness. The lion was not afraid of them. It was not preparing to attack. It was simply observing. And then, in a movement that was slow and deliberate and clearly cost the animal considerable effort, the lion lifted its head. It looked down at the fawn, ensuring once more that the small animal was still breathing, still alive, still safe. And then it turned its head back toward the hikers. For a long moment, nothing moved. The wind had died down to almost nothing, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And then the lion did something extraordinary. It raised one massive paw and placed it gently on the fawn's back. Not in a threatening gesture, not in a predatory move, but in a protective one. The gesture of a guardian, a protector, a mother watching over her young. And in that moment, Sarah understood something fundamental about what was happening on this mountain trail. The lion wasn't just protecting the fawn out of some abstract sense of compassion. The lion was claiming the fawn. The lion was declaring, in the only way a mountain lion could declare such a thing, that this small creature was under its protection, that any threat to the fawn would be a threat to the lion itself. "The lion is telling us something," Sarah said slowly. "It's telling us that it's okay, that we can approach, that it trusts us." "That's insane," Marcus said. But he was already moving forward, drawn by the same compulsion that had drawn Sarah, unable to resist the pull of that extraordinary moment. David and Jennifer followed, the 4 of them moving slowly, carefully, toward the pair on the trail. With each step, Sarah expected the lion to react, to snarl, to raise its lip and show its teeth in warning. But the lion did nothing. It simply lay there, its paw resting gently on the fawn's back, its eyes watching the hikers approach with what could only be described as acceptance. When they were just a few feet away, Sarah knelt down slowly, keeping her movements smooth and non-threatening. She could see the wound more clearly now, could see the extent of the damage, could see the way the lion's breathing was becoming more labored with each passing moment. "We're going to help you," she whispered to the lion. "We're going to try anyway. We don't know if we can make a difference, but we're going to try." David was already opening his backpack, pulling out the first aid kit. It was a basic one, designed for treating human injuries. Antiseptic wipes, antibiotic ointment, gauze pads, medical tape. Nothing that was designed for a mountain lion, nothing that would truly address the severity of the wound. But it was something. And as David began to carefully clean the wound, as he gently wiped away the dried blood and applied the antiseptic ointment, the lion did not resist. The great cat's eyes closed, and its breathing became slightly more shallow. But it did not move. It did not try to attack. It did not pull away. The fawn, sensing the activity, lifted its head slightly and looked at the humans with an expression of curiosity rather than fear. The small animal's eyes were bright now, alert, fully alive. The poison had completely cleared from its system. The paralysis had completely resolved. The fawn was going to survive. But the lion... Sarah looked at the great cat's face, at the way the animal's breathing was becoming more and more labored, at the way its eyes seemed to be losing focus. The wound was too deep, too severe. The blood loss was too significant. Even with their help, even with the best veterinary care that money could buy, the lion probably wasn't going to survive. "We need to get help," Jennifer said, her voice urgent. "We need to call for a helicopter or the park rangers or someone who can actually help this animal." Sarah pulled out her phone and looked at the screen. No signal. Of course there was no signal. They were too high up, too deep in the wilderness, too far from any kind of civilization. "We'll have to go back," Marcus said. "One of us needs to hike back down the trail, get to a place where we have cell service, and call for help. By the time help arrives, it will be too late," Sarah said quietly. She was looking at the lion, at the way the great cat's breathing was becoming more and more shallow, at the way the light seemed to be slowly fading from its eyes. The lion doesn't have that much time. The realization hung over them like a death knell, heavy and inescapable. They had come to this mountain to hike, to enjoy nature, to experience the beauty and majesty of the wilderness. Instead, they had become witnesses to something far more profound. A story of sacrifice, of compassion, of one creature choosing to give up its own life for the sake of another. And now they were faced with the knowledge that they could not save it. They could not undo what had been done. They could not change the outcome that was already written into the fabric of this moment. All they could do was bear witness. All they could do was honor what the lion had done by being present in its final moments, by acknowledging the extraordinary nature of its sacrifice, by refusing to turn away or pretend that it didn't matter. Sarah reached out slowly and placed her hand on the lion's head. The great cat's eyes opened for just a moment, and in that moment, Sarah saw something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. She saw gratitude. She saw peace. She saw the understanding that comes with knowing that your sacrifice has meant something, that it has made a difference, that it has changed the world in some small but fundamental way. And then the lion's eyes closed again, and its breathing became even more shallow. And Sarah knew that the end was near. The sun had moved perceptibly lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the mountain trail that seemed to stretch toward infinity. Sarah checked her watch again. 6:15 p.m. The afternoon had transformed into early evening, and with it came a subtle shift in temperature, a coolness that hadn't been present before. The wind, which had been intermittent throughout the day, had picked up again, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. Something that smelled like rain approaching from the distant valleys below. The lion's breathing had become barely perceptible now, a shallow rise and fall of its massive chest that seemed almost like the breathing of a creature already halfway between life and death, suspended in some liminal space between the two states of being. The great cat's eyes remained closed, and its body had gone completely still, except for that faint, almost imperceptible movement of breath. The fawn, by contrast, had become increasingly alert. The small animal had stood up on all four legs working perfectly now, the paralysis completely resolved, and was moving around the lion's body with what appeared to be concern, nuzzling the great cat's face, pressing its small nose against the lion's cheek in a gesture that seemed almost like an attempt to wake the animal, to call it back from whatever darkness was drawing it away. Sarah remained kneeling beside the lion's head, her hand still resting gently on the great cat's fur. She could feel the warmth of the animal's body, could feel the slight vibration of its heartbeat, though the rhythm seemed irregular now, stuttering and uncertain. She had read somewhere that, in the final moments of life, animals often became aware of a presence, of someone bearing witness to their passing. She hoped that was true. She hoped that the lion knew it was not alone, that there were creatures, human creatures, creatures that should have been its enemies, present to acknowledge the extraordinary nature of what it had done. David had finished with the first aid supplies as much as he could. The wound had been cleaned as thoroughly as possible, and fresh gauze had been applied, secured with medical tape that was wholly inadequate for the task, but represented the best they could do. The bleeding had slowed somewhat, though not because of anything they had done. It had slowed because the lion's heart was beating more slowly now, pumping less blood with each weakening beat. It was a grim sign, a signal that the end was approaching more rapidly than any of them had anticipated. "We should still try to get help," Marcus said, though his voice had lost much of its earlier conviction. He was standing a few feet away from the group, his arms wrapped around himself as if he were cold, though the temperature was still relatively mild. "One of us could head back down the trail, get to a place with cell service. We could call the park rangers, call a veterinarian, call someone who might be able to do something." "And leave the lion alone?" Jennifer asked quietly. She was sitting on a rock now, her eyes fixed on the great cat, tears streaming steadily down her face. "After everything it's done, after the sacrifice it's made, we're just going to abandon it in its final moments so we can feel like we tried to do something? That's not fair," Marcus said, his voice defensive. "We're trying to help. We're trying to save its life." "But we can't," Sarah said softly, and there was no accusation in her voice, only a statement of fact. "We both know that. Even if someone arrived right now, even if a veterinarian with all the equipment and expertise in the world appeared on this trail in the next 5 minutes, it would be too late. The wound is too severe. The blood loss is too significant. The lion is dying, and nothing we do is going to change that." The words hung in the air, harsh and final, but also strangely peaceful. There was something about accepting the inevitable, about acknowledging the reality of the situation, that seemed to bring a kind of calm. The frantic energy that had characterized much of the afternoon seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet acceptance of what was happening. "Then what do we do?" David asked. "We just sit here and watch?" "Yes," Sarah said. "We sit here and watch. We bear witness. We acknowledge what this creature has done. We honor its sacrifice by being present, by not turning away, by refusing to pretend that this doesn't matter or that it isn't extraordinary." As if in response to her words, the fawn pressed itself closer to the lion's body, settling down beside the great cat in a position that mirrored the way the lion had been protecting it just hours before. the small animals' breathing synchronized with the lion's breathing, the two creatures moving as one, their bodies rising and falling in perfect harmony. It was as if the fawn understood, on some level that transcended species and instinct, that its protector was leaving, and it wanted to be as close as possible in these final moments. Sarah found herself thinking about the poacher, about the person who had set the trap and the poison, about the human being who had come to this mountain with the intention of causing death and destruction. She wondered where that person was now. She wondered if they had any idea what their actions had set in motion, what extraordinary chain of events had been triggered by their cruelty and their greed. She wondered if they would ever know about the lion that had sacrificed itself for a fawn, about the mountain lion that had transcended the basic instincts of its species to show compassion and mercy and love. And she wondered if it would have made any difference to them if they did know. "We should document this," Marcus said suddenly. "We should take photographs, record video, create some kind of record of what happened here. So that people know? So that the world knows." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We're not going to do that." "What?" Marcus looked at her with surprise and something that might have been anger. "Why not? This is the most important thing that's ever happened. This is something that could change how people understand animals, how they understand nature, how they understand compassion itself. We have to share it." "And how do you think the world will respond?" Sarah asked quietly. "Do you think they'll be moved by the story of a lion's sacrifice? Or do you think they'll be more interested in the fact that there's a wounded mountain lion on a mountain trail? Do you think they'll want to preserve this moment, to honor it, to let it unfold naturally? Or do you think they'll want to capture it, to exploit it, to turn it into content for social media and news outlets?" She paused, letting her words sink in. The poacher who set the trap and the poison, they came here because they saw this mountain, this wilderness, as a resource to be exploited, as something to be used for profit or sport or personal gratification. If we document this moment, if we share it with the world, we're doing the same thing. We're taking something sacred, something that should remain between us and this mountain and these two creatures, and we're turning it into a commodity. We're violating the sanctity of what we're witnessing. "So we just let it be forgotten?" David asked. "We let this incredible act of sacrifice disappear, lost to time and memory?" "No," Sarah said. "We remember it. We carry it with us. We let it change us, reshape us, inform the way we move through the world. That's how we honor it. Not by broadcasting it to the world, but by allowing it to become part of our own personal narratives, our own understanding of what's possible, what's real, what matters." The sun continued its descent, and the shadows grew longer. The temperature continued to drop, and the wind continued to pick up, carrying with it the increasingly obvious scent of rain. The storm that had been building in the distant mountains was moving closer, drawn by forces that no human could control or predict. Sarah found herself thinking about the cycle of life, about the way that death was not an ending but a transformation, a return of energy and matter back into the world from which it had come. The lion would die here on this mountain trail, and its body would become food for the scavengers, for the insects, for the bacteria and fungi that would break it down and return its nutrients to the soil. The fawn would survive, would grow, would eventually have young of its own, and those young would carry forward the genetic legacy of the lion's compassion, would inherit a world that had been shaped by this moment, by this sacrifice. Everything was connected. Everything was part of a larger pattern that humans could observe but never fully understand or control. And perhaps that was the real lesson of this day. Not that animals were capable of compassion, though they clearly were, but that humans were not at the center of the universe, were not the measure of all things, were not the only creatures capable of moral complexity and emotional depth. "I'm going to stay with it," Jennifer said suddenly. "I'm going to stay here until the end. I don't care if it's dark. I don't care if the storm comes. I'm not leaving this lion alone." "We'll all stay," David said quietly. "We'll all be here." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in the faces of his companions stopped him. He nodded slowly, accepting the decision that had been made without words, understanding that this was something they needed to do, something they needed to witness, something that was more important than safety or comfort or any of the other concerns that normally governed human behavior. And so they waited. The sun continued to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in increasingly dramatic shades of orange and red and purple. The wind grew stronger, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. The hikers huddled together, using their bodies to shield the lion and Fawn from the worst of the weather. Though they knew it was a futile gesture, knew that the lion was beyond the point where such things mattered. The great cat's breathing became even more shallow, more irregular. Long pauses would stretch between breaths, stretches of time where Sarah would wonder if that breath had been the last one, if this was the moment when the lion crossed over from life to death. And then, just when she was certain it was over, the lion's chest would rise again, would fall again, would continue the slow journey toward the end. The fawn remained pressed against the lion's body, and Sarah found herself wondering what the small animal was experiencing, what it understood about death, about loss, about the departure of the creature that had saved its life. Was the fawn aware that its protector was leaving? Did it understand that the warmth it was pressing itself against would soon grow cold? Or was it simply following some instinct, some ancient pattern of behavior that told it to stay close to the source of safety and warmth? And then, as the last light was fading from the sky, as the darkness was beginning to creep across the mountain and the storm was beginning to build in earnest, the lion's breathing changed one final time. It became even shallower, even more labored. The pauses between breaths grew longer, stretched out into what seemed like eternities. And then, in a moment that was both peaceful and devastating, the breathing stopped. Sarah felt it more than she saw it. Felt the moment when the lion's body transitioned from the state of being alive to the state of being dead. It was as if something essential, something that could not be measured or quantified or explained by science, simply departed. The body remained, warm still, but the presence that had animated it, the consciousness that had made it more than just flesh and bone and muscle, was gone. The fawn lifted its head and made a sound, a small bleat of distress that seemed to echo across the mountain. The small animal pressed itself even closer to the lion's body, as if trying to warm it, to wake it, to call it back from whatever darkness it had entered. But the lion did not respond. The lion did not move. The lion was gone. And in that moment, as the rain began to fall harder and the wind began to howl through the mountain passes, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The weight of what she had witnessed, the magnitude of the sacrifice that had just been completed, the extraordinary nature of what she and her companions had been privileged to see. It all settled into her bones, became part of her, would remain with her for the rest of her life. They would hike down the mountain tomorrow. They would reach civilization. They would return to their normal lives. But they would never be the same. None of them would ever be the same. because they had witnessed something that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human experience, something that had fundamentally altered their understanding of what was possible, what was real, what mattered. And as the darkness deepened and the storm raged around them, Sarah placed her hand on the lion's head one final time, whispered a prayer or a blessing or simply a thank you to the great creature that had given everything to save another life. And she knew, with a certainty that went beyond words or logic, that this moment would define her for the rest of her life.